What is up, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about lists in Python. So lists in Python are actually great. You can do a lot with them, but that's kind of, daunting for beginners because they're like, where do I start? There's so many ways of doing the same thing. What do I do? So in this video, we're going to talk about the basics of what a list is in Python and the basic functionalities. In the next video, we'll talk about slicing and more advanced features and functions. So to start off, let's say I want to define a shopping list. So I'm going to say shopping list, right? So, if you don't know what lists are, then you might say, well, let me individually define each item. Let me say item 1 is equal to banana, right? Item 2 is equal to bread, and then so on, right? So you have a list of items. But then why can't you use a list? A list is basically a collection of items, in one variable, in one list, right? So a list is basically a collection of items or values in one object. So I'm going to define a shopping list, and then this is going to be a list. So the square brackets denote a list. So when you see square brackets, that means this is a list, and whatever is inside of it is all the values that you're going to have in the list. So let's say I'm going to say banana, right? And then how can I add another one? I would say comma, and then I can add another element. Let's say bread. And then if I want to add another element, again, comma, and then whatever the element is. So let's say milk. Right? So what I basically did here is I said, okay, I'll have a variable called shopping list, and I want to actually assign a list to this variable. And this list is basically a collection of values or items in this list. So if you're coming from another language like C, C++, or Java, you might be used to the fact that lists should have items of the same type, right? As you can see here, these are all strings. But in Python, this is not necessarily the case. I can actually have a Boolean, I can have a integer, I can have a float, I can have whatever I want here, and this will be fine. This will not throw any errors. As you can see, if I print this, I'm basically going to print this list. It's going to basically show us that what's in the list. As you can see here, when I print, it basically prints the exact same thing. There's no errors. There's no errors of actually defining this list. So you might be confused if you're coming from another language, but that's basically how lists work in Python. You don't need to have the same type. This is a string, this is a Boolean, this is an int, this is a float. It doesn't matter as long as you have a valid thing, right? A valid data type. So let's actually keep this just strings just for simplicity and just for the idea that this is a shopping list, so it doesn't really make sense to have numbers in a shopping list. So now you might say, okay, that's cool, but how do I actually access these elements? How do I say, hey, I want to actually get, the bread element, or I want to get the milk element? Well, in Python, there's a very easy way of doing this, and this is basically using indexes. So the idea is that imagine that each element is at a specific location, right? So let's say this location is 0, this location is 1, this location is 2, right? So these are what are known as indexes, right? So starting from the first element, the index is always 0. And then the next element would be what? It would be 1, right? And then the next element would be 2. So you always start from 0. You don't start from 1, you start from 0. So the index is basically the location of the element, kind of, but starting from 0. So if I want to access, let's say, banana, right? And I want to, let's say, assign it to a variable called banana, and then I want to actually get this variable, this value, and assign it to this variable. So how do I do that? Well, first you want to actually reference the list, right? So this is called shopping list, and then you want to actually do square brackets. So what this is saying is, okay, I'm actually going to access this variable, which is a list, and I actually want to specify the location or the index of the element that I want, right? If you want bread, or you want banana, you want milk, how do I know? Well, that's where you actually put a index or a location, right? So I remember I told you guys that starting from the first element, it starts at index 0. So if I put 0, I'm basically going to get the first element, right? Because I said that the location starts from 0. And then when I print this, notice what happens. I'm printing the first element. Because like I said, each element in this list has an index or a location, right? And each element in this list will have an index, but starting from the first element, it will start with an index of 0, and the next one will be 1. So if I say 1, what does that give us? Bread, right? If I say 2, what will that give us? Milk, because you're starting from 0, you're going to 1, you're going to 2. You're saying, okay, I want the element at index or at location 2, which is 0, 1, 2. Right? And then you might say, well, what if I say 3? What's going to happen now? Well, you actually get an error saying list index out of range. Well, what does that mean? Well, basically, remember I said each element has an index starting from 0. So 0, 1, 2, but then there's no 3, right? That's it. There's no element at index 3. So essentially, you're trying to get a element at a list at an index that's out of range, right? Because there's only indexes 0, 1, and 2 in this list, and 3 actually is out of the range, right? So anytime you see this error, that's what it means. It's basically saying that you're trying to access an element that's not actually in the list, or you're trying to access, an element at a location that's not in the list. That's a better definition. So, okay, now we know how to actually access elements. Now, what if we want to actually change this element? Let's say I want to change the value of this element at index 1. How do I do that? Well, you would use something similar to this. You would say shopping list, right? You're accessing this variable, you're referencing to it, and you're saying, I actually want to get the location, right? So say I want to change red to, let's say, bagels. I want to say 1. So what this is saying is, okay, get the element or the location at index 1, right? So location is 1. So at index 1, which is here, of this list, I want you to actually change that value to be something else, which is bagels. So what's going to happen is, okay, I'm getting the shopping list and I'm saying at the location at index 1, which is here, actually changes value to be bagels. So when I print this this whole list again, notice what happens now is actually, oops, remember we didn't change this. It should be 2, right? I mean, we can remove this because we already showed what it does. So what happens now is, as you can see here, it started off being banana, bread, milk, but then after I access the element at index 1, which is bread, and I change the value to be bagels, now the list actually has banana, bagels, milk, right? So that's how you can easily change elements in a list, and you can easily access elements in a list, right? So then you might say, well, how do I actually delete elements now? Let's say I wanted to delete this. I just wanted to get rid of it. So that's pretty easy. You can use a function or something called delete, del for short, right? And then similar to how we actually change and access elements, you would access the element or specify which element you want by the index. So I would say delete shopping list, and again I'm accessing this and I'm saying, okay, delete the element at location or at index 2. And remember, what is 2? Well, we're starting from 0, so 0, 1, 2. So I'm deleting the element in this list at index 2 or at location 2, so 0, 1, 2. So what this is going to do is it's going to delete this element, or it's going to delete milk from this list. So then when we print the value of this new list, notice what happens. Now milk is actually gone. It's no longer there because we deleted it, right? That's the basics of how you can delete actually an element in this list. Now some of you might say, okay, now I know how to change elements, now I know how to access elements, now I know how to delete elements, but what if I wanted to add a new element? Keep these the same, don't change anything, but add a new element. Well, you can actually use a function called append, right? So append basically is going to add it to the end. So let's say I want to add a new element. Let's say I want to add, I don't know, potatoes. So I want to say shopping list dot append, and then in the brackets I put whatever value I want to append. So I want to add potatoes, right? And you might be confused of what this dot is doing and where this append came from, but when we talk about methods and functions in the next few videos or so, you'll understand what functions are. But basically understand that if you want to add a new element to your list, you can say list, the name of that list, dot, and then append, right? And append is going to basically add this element to the end of this list. So if we try this out, notice what's going to happen. We actually print the initial list that we had, right? And then we print the new list after we add potatoes to the end, right? So now you guys know how to actually access values, how to change values, and then how to delete values, and also how to add new values. There's actually still a lot more that you can do, right? But to make this video short and to give you the basics in the beginning, I just talked about the basics of a list. And then in the next video, we're going to be talking about slicing, which makes dealing with lists much easier. You can do so much with slicing, and then other functions that are actually built in, similar to append, that you can use. and will make your life easier when using lists. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this made your understanding about lists better, and make sure to stay tuned, like, and subscribe.